public policies to help Michigan manufacturing companies repatriate capital from overseas back to Michigan and produce jobs here where they train Michigan unemployed people to do those jobs. That's not necessarily a foreign direct investment, that's Michigan reinvestment back in Michigan. But that might need some kind of redoing of the tax policies to be able to accomplish that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly why they would want to invest overseas and not invest in Michigan.
You know, it's an interesting point. I'm going to do the reverse of that, though. There's two projects that I worked on my previous job that I had. One of them was Bright Automotive, which had a concept to build an all-electric van. And the other was Alt-E, which is a company that President and CEO John Thomas and some others from Ford and other engineers created. And the concept of Alt-E was to take existing vehicles, especially fleet vehicles, and convert them to electric vehicles. And so both of those companies were anticipating federal funding under the Recovery Act. There was a significant amount of money set aside for doing alternative energy investments, and the U.S. was going to fund all these projects, and they had, you know, many companies, and I think it was Ford received a significant amount of money, for example, for retooling some of their facilities to make them more competitive and so on. Well, both Bright Automotive and Alt-E were on the target list to get some of that funding to help them, startup companies, but to help them get started and put their products on the market. Well, at the end of the day, the terms, the U.S. was a little bit disingenuous with their program, and the terms became increasingly difficult. And some of you probably read this in Cranes, but the terms became increasingly difficult for them to commit to, especially considering they were startup companies with venture capital backing them. And so at the end of the day, what happened was one of them walked away, and the other one basically said, you know, we're going out of business. We can't wait any longer, and you know, our burn rate, our cash is gone. So Bright Automotive out of business. Really unfortunate. You know, they were out in the market looking for 200 engineers. I mean, that's a lot of jobs, a lot of high-paying jobs to lose because the federal government didn't come forward with their commitment to this company. And then secondly, Alt-E, what did they do? They went to China. They met investors there, they got the investment they needed, they came back, and now they're opening their doors. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's an opportunity, and we're seeing other companies do the same thing. I know Bright Automotive also went to China, but they ran out of time. I think Anne Marie's trying to wrap this up. So.
I am trying. Another challenge. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling very antsy to get out there and get to work. So we've got a number of ideas, and there is no one that feels more antsy than our panelists here. They've worked so hard anyway.
It must be outdoor work.
Outdoor work, right? No, they pull the shades in my office, I think. But you know, I think there's so much information here. I have taken just numerous notes. Let me say that there are some other opportunities to continue this conversation, obviously, in your place of work, in your board meetings, in your community, and we want you to do that, and we'll help every way to do that. But also with conferences, Ben mentioned the Mackinac Policy Conference. That's a tremendous opportunity to network with business leaders and policymakers, and listen, but also inform them on what's important to you. And then we also have the Land Policy Institute, who puts together a Friday, April 20th summit, and it's the same thing, very policy oriented. I would say more grassroots level networking that would be available to you there. One other thing I would like to say is that there's so much value in asking your neighbor, your next community, or your business leader, how can I help? And so I think that's a real important question to put at the top of your list. You know, how can I help? How can my community be of service? But also, how can others help you? And so when you meet in these networking groups, you can be able to say, like our panelists did today, well, we need these policy changes or revisions, reform. We have these policy questions. Some of the things that came up was that we talked about, I believe Dan talked about how a river can become a barrier, and we're finding that sometimes a highway can become a barrier. So, I think that is something we don't want to happen in our communities. We want to, Janice had talked about helping people know what services are strong in their community and what might not be so strong in the next door community. So how can we share those services? How can we share strengths? We talked about tax incentives for collaboration, and we ended on that note in some regard that we wanted to be tax friendly to investors. Land use issues, mass transit, infrastructure issues, IT, pre-clearance for trucks. Dan started off with saying standardized training for Border Patrol. I think there's a lot of conversation about that, and no one's nixing that idea. So the willingness to cooperate is big here. Immigration policy. David Hollister is right. Canada is doing some really crazy stuff with immigration policy, and it would be worth taking a look. Mix of public-private investment, something definitely worth working for. We talked about apprentice programs and rethinking education, being innovative in that way. So the list goes on. And I think really the whole thinking out of the box, that phrase became somewhat cliche, but Michigan does have that opportunity to think very innovatively, and by listening to one another and talking to different communities and asking the question, how can I help? How can you assist us? Might lead to some pretty good partnerships. So I would encourage you to ask those questions. I really want to challenge you to repeat these conversations outside of this room. And I also want to ask you to help me thank our panelists.